So we've answered everything with swords.
Okay, so no more swords.
No more swords.
No one likes swords.
Well, it might pop up at some point,
I'm
but
sure.
swords are always involved somehow.
That's fair.
But with daggers, first question for that is,
all right,
how have daggers been perceived differently from swords? Oh, there's swords.
Oh, there it is.
More as tools of treachery, stealth, or personal defenses.
Ooh, okay. So I like the idea of connecting daggers with treachery and stealth. And that's not always the case. There's tons of daggers across time that are just paired with weapons, paired with swords. You get things like the sail dagger or the crab claw dagger or, crab crossguard dagger. And those ones are not meant for stealth. Those are meant to be paired with, in this case, or usually a rapier. I also mentioned earlier the cinqueria, the Italian dagger, which is more of a like, look at me, rather than something stealthy. But there's also tons of daggers or blades that were meant to be concealed, like hidden underneath garb or cloak or what have you. But those are usually not associated with warfare, unless you talk about like spies or infiltration.
There's spies everywhere.
But the daggers have there's just as many varieties of daggers as there are swords. And we have to look at the specific use of the dagger. For example, if we talk about the stiletto, which is a very, very little dagger that is specifically meant to be hidden, and there's examples of like fancy looking ones. Like if you have a jewel in your stiletto, it's not going to be like a hiding one, but it's a little knife that you can carry and conceal, and usually stabbing people in the back, quote unquote, which means doing it stealthy, doing it sneaky. That is in comparison to the long-standing human tradition of dueling one-on-one, face-to-face, facing your opponent, using your own strength, your own skills, your own abilities to face their strength, skills, and abilities, one-on-one, mano-a-mano. And with that tradition, you compare that to stabbing someone in the back, you're not giving them a chance to defend themselves. You're basically using a modern concept. You're cheating. You're not letting them do that. So it's almost unfair. If you are a stealthy dagger user, you're an assassin, you're someone who is not letting that person have a chance to defend themselves. Obviously there's multiple ways that you can look at this situation. Sometimes you don't want someone to have a chance to defend themselves. But that is usually why they're looked at negatively. But again, also that curiosity about it. That's why you get things like assassins and thieves as an archetype character class in the tabletop games that you have today, because it's interesting, it's fascinating, it's necessary.
And people like being sneaky, and
it's a different type of skill set too. A fighter, to use another character class, would be very skillful and knowledgeable in the use of the sword and the different techniques and the methods to do it. But a stealthy person, an assassin from history or a thief from fantasy, has their own skill set to be able to do this or that, to get close enough to their target and do it in such a way where they can escape. The number of assassination attempts or assassins that weren't caught across time shows that it is a certain type of skill set that can be learned and practiced, just like sword fighting martial arts. And I think that's fascinating to remember too. But I think it's that different skill set that led them to be seen as negative or dark.
Yeah. It's dark.
Yeah. Positivity.
We're talking about history. You're not going to see much positivity,
That's
especially
fair.
when it comes to weapons.
Well, weapons. Yeah, exactly right. We have a joke too, like which of our historical reenactment impressions that we do are the good guys. And we always think we have one, and then we're like, oh, and then they performed this act, which they called the rape of this village. And you're like, oh, okay, never mind.
That's terrible.
Yeah, we haven't found the closest we found is German peasant rebellions in the 1500s. We've done that impression a couple times, and we're like, it's the closest thing we have to good guys, but they still weren't perfect.
No. Violence just breeds more violence.
Yeah.
Next question is, what cultural rituals, such as like sacrifices, initiations, oaths, involve daggers as sacred objects?
Oh my gosh, how can you make me be positive when you're talking about sacrifices?
I know. Let's just go grab a pig real quick.
No,
demonstrate.
I don't know. Um, I already mentioned the Indonesian keris, but I
Mhm.
do want to bring that up again because the keris it is what folks would consider a dagger.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot of different opinions or different cultural beliefs on
Mhm.
how much does this count as a dagger versus a talisman, but there is always a ritual around how it's made, sometimes involving offerings and essences of smells and good odors in the
Yeah.
construction and blessing of the dagger. And this is not meant, we've associated this, we being Westerners, especially back in the 1800s when Indonesia was colonized,
Mhm.
we've given this a negative belief. We've given this the belief that it is a poisoned weapon that is intentionally used to sneak, even the tiniest cut will infect the victim. But in reality, this was a very religious, sacred thing to the folks of Indonesia at the time, and even today. And it is not. We Westerners have labeled it as negative when it never was.
Right.
It was a religious weapon, and that might be the difference between daggers in Western culture and certain Eastern cultures.
Mhm.
Um, for example, we've talked about the wakizashi a bit, which is a short sword, or the tanto, which is a knife or dagger in Japanese history, which was made with the same ritualistic construction that the katana and tachi were made with too.
Mhm.
Um, when we really get into rituals, people really like, or sacrifices, people really
Yes.
like sacrificing. And for example, the Aztecs were they're the archetype culture for human sacrifice,
Mhm.
because they did it a lot.
Just throw you in the volcano there.
No, they used a dagger. In fact, what they would
Oh
do is
man,
they
El
would,
Dorado lied to me.
yeah, but that's okay. It's not the most historical movie, as much as I love it.
Ah, I just
What
like the music.
I did this when I was teaching. I was teaching middle school at one point, and I was teaching them about Aztecs. And I was like, "All right, guys, we're going to do a human sacrifice." So basically, what you would do is you
I
take
can't
us.
believe I missed out on that in
You
school.
know what? Their schools are missing out.
They really are.
So what the Aztecs would do, or the middle schoolers, whichever you want, we'd lay them down on a ritual altar. It was like a long stone
Mhm.
bed. Lay them down, and usually, if it was a sacrifice who was willing, it was seen as an honor. But if you take into account the conquistadors and their memoirs, they would say most went down willingly, but some were done kicking and screaming, which is horrible to think about. These are
Yeah.
human sacrifices, but this was important to the culture at the time. I'm not trying to mean that the Aztecs were bad people. That's not the case. It was a very
Mhm.
unique cultural situation that had a massive history that led
Yeah.
them to get there. Um, the actual practice of it was they would make an incision under the rib cage. The priests would reach up, grab the heart, pull it out, still beating. Probably a few people visually saw their own heart. Uh, and that would be a sacrifice as an example of life and success and wealth, and not wealth, I'm sorry, I should say life wealth, or lifeblood.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
Sacrifice that to the sun, which gave you all the life that you needed for growing crops and happiness and all that, and the body would be kicked away. The heart would be placed on an altar, and this happened a lot. And what's fascinating is as we have good written examples of weapons from the Aztecs, and
Mhm.
the dagger used for sacrifice is an obsidian bladed single piece of obsidian dagger that they would use. Now that was not used in warfare. They would use weapons like this one, the makwawitl, on the wall here as an example of warfare. And
Okay.
you can see that they still had the obsidian here,
Yeah.
but it was not meant for slicing. It was not meant for the detailed work of removing a
Mhm.
human heart. Uh, so this is one example of
Yeah.
many of cultures across time where the ritual dagger is not a warfare weapon. They are used two separate uses.
Mhm.
And that leads us to talk about how blades in general have multiple uses. And we love the swords and we love the warfare, but we have to remember blades are
Yeah.
an awesome tool. I know I just talked about human sacrifice, but they're tools. They're an example of how humans have overcome are limitations. We can't like slice things. I can't get into I grow my fingernails real long.
They just curl after a while and drill in.
But it shows how humanity has taken the earth around us and used that to give us abilities that we otherwise wouldn't have. Like ripping out human hearts. Yeah, that was a good positive talk right there.
Yeah, that's honestly reminding me of, what was it, Braveheart?
Go, let's keep it going.
Okay. Next question for daggers is, why were some daggers, which you've talked about quite a few of them, status symbols despite their small size?
I think that there's certain things that folks need to realize that there's status that isn't just about size. One of the things that you see with daggers frequently is the design of the dagger, the construction, the artistic input, even things like how the grip is wrapped or the pommel is shaped, or sometimes they even put gold or silver inlay in the pommels or the guards, gemstones embedded in it. And it's not necessarily the size of it that matters. It's what you put into it. And of course, human history, it's not necessarily you making the dagger, it's how much money you put into it to have it made for you.
Money.
And again, that says an example of the power you have over other people.
Yeah.
So these daggers are more like showpieces. Like look at how, you can talk about things like Ferraris, sports cars, the high quality ones, McLarens and all that. It's the same concept. Like, I don't need to drive this perfect car to Meijer to go get my groceries,
Yeah.
But if I have it, I'm going to do it to show off a bit.
Of course.
Same with the daggers or many other swords, even the small swords. I'm not going to use this to kill everyone down the street. In fact, I would likely not ever use this to kill, but I'm still wearing it and I'm doing it to show off. It's not because I'm worried about self-defense every time I go out of my house. It's because I want to show off. I think that's the thing, because the other thing is daggers are able to go with you anywhere. A sword, sword's got the scabbard, it's hitting you. You got to wear a belt that holds it properly. You trip over it, you whack people's thighs. Daggers right here. It's very easy to control. Very easy to show off without tripping people.
That's true. For me, I'd have struggles with the sword, but that's because I'm a short person. As we've established, they come up to like here.
You can just angle it. You just angle it higher. It's fine.
We've answered swords, daggers, the generalization. Now we're on to axes.
Oh boy. Ask me a question.
Nice pun.
Okay.
In what cultures were axes linked to deities or mythical heroes? So like Thor's Mjolnir or the Labrys in Minoan? I'm terrible with words.
Minoan, I think is how it's usually pronounced, but
I've heard different ways, so
I am not familiar with axes as mythical weapons. I can instead talk about archaeologically mythical weapons. For example, which is topic I know. For example, the mammon axe, as it's called. It's an archaeological find. It's a physical item. It is an axe head from the Vikings.
Okay.
And it has beautiful knotwork and designs twisting and looping on the actual axe head. It's beautiful. Vikings were artisans. So this axe, beautiful knotwork, Celt design. It is so pretty that it actually lends its name to a type of art form used by the Vikings, the mammon art style. That the Vikings did with the similar knotwork and animalistic designs that you see on the mammon axe. And so that I like as like instead of being all mythical about like, ooh, Excalibur, let's be mythical about, ooh, the mammon axe head. It has such a representation on the history and scholarliness that we love because it represents a larger scale in the terms of the scholarly world. That's my insight in axes. I don't know too many other mythical axes. I'm sure if I thought about it, I'd do one. We also have there's a museum out there that has Tecumseh's axe, which is a very American history. Tecumseh being one of the military leaders of the Indian uprisings in the early 1800s, fighting for unity and fighting back against the white settlers. And he was gifted a very high quality tomahawk, a variety of axe by the British, perfectly made, engraved, beautiful. It's out there online. Take a look at it. That is definitely mythical, though it's real, artifact from our own American history. And I think that's
Yeah,
pretty fascinating too.
that is really fascinating. Because honestly, I've learned so much about U.S. history with school and everything, but at the same time, like there are things that get left out, such as like that.
Mm.
That's something that maybe we went over once or twice when we went over
Mm-hmm.
like the Revolutionary War and before then, but
I'd love to give. America has a whole hand-to-hand combat history. I teach weird. I teach American Civil War saber, American bayonet combat
okay.
from manuals, and even I teach World War II U.S. GI unfixed bayonet, as in knife in hand, used in World War II. And that's modern. That's World War II. It's
Yeah,
cool stuff.
that's like much closer to us than Civil War and everything
Oh
else.
yeah.
So
I mean, I've even got this sword right here. Not that we're getting off topic, but like this one right here is an American World War II and later cutlass. There's our accounts of soldiers with this sword in the Korean War in the 50s, cutting down their opponents with this. The 50s. Swords are not magical historical items. They are still used today. Bayonets are still being trained, and knife fighting is still being trained in modern militaries.
I didn't realize that stuff was still being trained, honestly. So
And it's important because people associate swords with these mythical histories when it's really a
yeah,
deeper connection to us today. Sorry, I
they
yelled.
never really died out, basically.
Yeah, it's human history and swords go hand in hand. You cannot talk about the history and the story of us without also talking about blades and how they're used.
So the next question is why were throwing axes like the Francisca feared in warfare, and how did they shape battlefield tactics?
Here's our cold hard truth. Modern Americans are obsessed with throwing axes, when in reality they weren't historically significant. The Francesca, which is the Frankish throwing axe from the early Middle Ages, we're talking like 400s to 600s, or 400s to 800s, I think, was an axe designed for throwing. I think I have one if you want me to go grab it, but it's an axe designed for throwing. I want to confirm the difference between a throwing axe and an axe that is thrown. A throwing axe is an axe that is designed for throwing, like the Francesca. It's a specific shape. The handle is curved, the head is curved, so it can maximize the ability to strike with the edge. Whereas an axe is a weapon used or a tool used for not throwing, and it is then thrown. That does not make it a throwing axe. That makes it an axe that is thrown, which can still be practical.
So kind of like the Vikings, if they did potentially throw their axes.
Sad truth, we don't have any evidence of Vikings throwing axes, or I guess we have sagas, but they're throwing non-throwing axes. So the tomahawk is another prime example. Tons of primary sources saying that the Native Americans who used tomahawks were good at throwing them and can hit a target with a throwing axe. But the tomahawk itself was not designed to be thrown. It was designed to be used in the hand as a hand weapon that could also be thrown.
Yeah.
Which is really fascinating because there's a differentiation between that. Another example of a throwing axe is something called a hurlbat. It was a late Middle Ages, early Renaissance European throwing star. Was all metal, had spikes on all the heads. It looked like an axe with an axe head with a spike and a spike and a spike, and you just throw it, and it's a chunk of metal flying at you with blades and an axe head on it. It's really sick, and that is designed to be thrown.
I'd be a little terrified if I saw that coming at me.
But the thing is, with all these throwing axes, they were never massively used in warfare. They were never like, throwing axemen, you have a very special use on the battlefield. Because when you really break it down, a lot of warfare, at least the tactics, I should say, the tactics specifically are very practical. And a throwing axe is just not a practical weapon. you can really only throw it so far. A bow or a throwing spear can throw farther than an axe, or especially a spear with a spear thrower or even a sling can throw farther and more dangerous than an axe, especially because an axe, you have to make sure the rotation is proper. If anyone who's done professional axe throwing or even axe throwing at a arena, you have to have your proper distance because you have to get the rotation right so that the blade actually sticks. Otherwise, you're just conking people on the head with a wooden stick.
Or it comes back at you.
Or it comes back at you, which a lot of people have used as justification to try to find a niche for the throwing axe. Like if you're on the battlefield and everyone throws their axes, it could fly past you and then bounce back and strike you on the back of the head. You're drawing at straws with that one. That's you're pulling threads.
Yeah.
So the thing is, the throwing axes don't have an important part on the battlefield, but I think that's why people like it, because the Francesca I mentioned was as early as the 400s. The tomahawk is as recent as the mid 1800s. They still are thrown. So the concept of, even though they might not be practical, they were still there. They're a niche, awesome part of our history, and I think it's that curiosity that lead people to like throwing axes. It does take a lot of skill. It's almost like playing ranged weapon on hard mode, because you have to have really good skill with it.
I do not have that good of skill.
It's fun to
My
practice.
aim's good, but
that's fair. Okay.
I don't always have the strength when it comes to the throwing.
When we do our class, we've done the throwing axe class here at the museum before, and it isn't necessarily about technique, because the technique is pretty simple. Measure yourself, watch your rotation, go forward or backward based on the rotation, and try to do the exact same motion with the exact same strength so that you can get your muscle memory down. But what we did is we went through the different historical weapons. We did woodsman's hatchet, we did tomahawk, we did hurlbat, we did Francesca, and we brought out a day with things like throwing darts and ninja stars, so that people can try the same concepts with other weapons for throwing. So it was really more of a smorgasbord of the different historical examples rather than a historical technique. And I think that helps satiate that curiosity, because there's so many out there.
Yes. We love curious people, and that's what humans are.
Good curious. Exactly right. I see what you're getting at.
So we've answered axes, swords, daggers, generalizations. Now we're on to hammers. So for hammers, why were war hammers? I am going to totally butcher this name. For example, like the Bec de Corbin.
Cool.
Or did I say that right?
No, Bec de Corbin is fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or the pole hammer, particularly effective against armored opponents. And how did this influence their cultural perception?
Cool. So war hammers are really fascinating, because you get, what qualifies as a war hammer? Do I pick up if I'm a peasant and I pick up a stick that's heavy on one end, is that a war hammer? If I'm an Irish faction fighter and I pick up my shillelagh, is that a war hammer? It's made out of wood. It's got heavy stuff at the end rather than a sword that has heavy stuff at the bottom. What makes it a war hammer? But if we talk specifically about the weapons that are very clearly war hammers, war hammer, a hammer for war, you get a bunch of varieties of things that are useful in different ways. The iconic one is a lucerne hammer. And that's a hammer. I mean, you picture a hammer, but instead of the flat front of a normal hammer, it has 4 spikies on each of the corner of the square front. That turns it into a hammer for puncturing. Really good at it, too.
And see, it sounds like it'd be really good at puncturing.
Yeah, and that's
just picturing a poor watermelon being stabbed.
Oh, jeez, watermelons don't stand a chance. But that's what you get with the Bec de Corbin that you mentioned before. It's a spike on the end of a hammer, or sometimes also called a bec du halcon, which is a falcon's beak rather than a corbin or a raven's beak.
Yeah.
Spiky, putting all the force of that forward momentum focused on that one teeny little point right at the end of that spike, and that gives it that puncturability. Now, when would we need puncturability? I have squishy, soft skin, and I'm sure that even a hammer hitting my shirt would not, I wouldn't be padded against it. So the real thing is what you mentioned before, the connection to knights and armor, because these war hammers are a tool with a specific job. Again, not unified or not universal, but sometimes they are used with a specific focus, in this case, getting through armor. And this is a big disappointment for most people, too. because many of these war hammers, especially ones that don't have a spike, like ones that's a true hammer, like a horseman's hammer from Poland,
Okay.
for example, the impact is what is focused on for takeout armor, because that armor is intricate. Armor is perfect for not getting slashed by a sword or a pole arm or what have you, or I should say a bladed pole arm. But the hammers are meant to bang, impact that armor so the joints don't properly line up.
So basically, I'm dislocating your shoulder, sort of thing.
Yeah, except you're dislocating my artificial exoskeleton.
Yeah.
And even then all of a sudden, I'm not able to move, hypothetically, or in this case, my shoulder. And now I'm stuck on the battlefield doing this. And that gives me time that gives my opponents time to gang up on me or take advantage of my lack of mobility. Do that to a leg, you can't move. I don't care how much armor you have, 10 guys are going to have a big advantage over you, even if they don't have armor, if your leg is incapacitated. So these war hammers have a very specific use on the battlefield. And I think that's really, really, really cool. Dive into the myth of like dwarves and dwarven war hammers. And like they're fighting against orcs who usually don't have, full armor, but they still like that hammer because in this mythical world, they are miners, and they use that in their myth. In the Hobbit books, the dwarves are shown fighting with mattocks, which is traditionally a tool for mining. And I think that that's really fascinating because these real world weapons in our real world have a real reason for them being used. And in the fantasy world, they also have a real reason, but it's a cultural rather than a practical reason. It's a fun connection, I think.
That is pretty interesting and fun.
I'm a big nerd when it comes to that.
It's okay. We're all nerds in some ways.
Yay.
So that leads us to pole arms now.
Oh, yay. I love pole arms.
Yeah. We like long, stabby things you could throw and everything or swing. All right. So why were pole arms often seen as the weapons of the people compared to swords, which were tied to elites?
That's a very good question. And we're gonna accept the simplification of that. The answer is simplified because at the end of the day, elites also used pole arms pretty regularly, with different examples and different exceptions across time. But when you go to true war, and I'm talking about actual war, not like a knight practicing or anything like that. When you are a country or a kingdom or a group going to war, you need to be effective. And most of the time, you are recruiting schmucks. You are recruiting people who have no experience in warfare, no desire to risk their lives on the battlefield, but they're forced to do so out of obligation or money or threats or what have you. So you want them to be effective. Pole arms are effective. Pole arms are incredibly effective because there is, and as someone who does historical sword fighting in tournament high intensity settings, when one fighter has a spear, one of the simplest war weapons across time, I don't care how skilled the other fighter is with whatever sword they want, the spear will have a massive advantage, even if it's being wielded by an inexperienced person. So the effectiveness of the pole arms should not be ignored, and especially when we're talking about simple pole arms like spears. Pop! I've got warfare now. I've got pole arms now. Hooray! So spears, super effective because a sword can only reach as far as you can reach with the sword, but I can just and now I'm kept at a distance from my scary opponent, and I can stab at them, and if they have any inkling of fear in their body, they will dodge my spear.
Yeah.
That's why the spear is technically the longest, lasting weapon on human history. And if you really break it down, if you really follow the tactics of military history, the gun, even the musket, is just a really long spear that, takes that long to shoot. Because it's the same concept. It's stab or bang only, as opposed to like a sword, which is slash. Now that's of course ignoring pole arms that can slash. We're talking glaives, naginatas, halberd heads, things like that. But at the end of the day, it's the reach, and one fascinating aspect is the physics behind it, because you have to have your potential or your kinetic energy that goes into impact. And impact is a really, really fascinating thing because a sword is not meant for impacting. You can swing it around and slash as much as you want, but there are certain pole arms where if you are making a lever with your hands, simply put, pulling with your lower hand, pushing with your upper hand, you make a really powerful swing, and the farther it is from your center of gravity, the more power there is in that force, which is really, really fascinating. Now, the quintessential polearm is the halberd. And I didn't have any of our metal halberds here, but I do have these wooden ones that we use when we're teaching the techniques, which are nice and light and easy to use. But it has a rough shape of what a metal halberd would have. And there's a few fascinating things about it. One is I like to point out the fact that halberds are your all-around use weapon. That's why they were usually given to sergeants or higher experienced soldiers rather than just a standard pike on the Renaissance battlefield. And so it has 3 points of it. three killing aspects of it. One, you mentioned it before, the bec du corbin, which is this particular back part, which a lot of people think is for puncturing armor, but this particular one actually isn't. It's actually for hooking and grabbing.
So dehorsing someone?
Dehorsing someone, rip it. Sometimes if it was sharpened on the bottom side, you could rip their reins or their horse tack. And there's actually techniques in manuals that teach us how to fight with a halberd that will occasionally use this for tripping your opponent, pulling their leg and making them fall flat. So that's really fascinating that this littlest part of the halberd, one, gets misrepresented in its use, and two, has such a wide variety.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I've seen misrepresentation online where this is meant for taking out armor, but that's actually not true. This is for taking out horses. Or sometimes tripping people. The anti-armor part of this is actually the axe head. And it's fascinating. This is not universal, but the majority of the time, the halberds are angled forward. So you can see this axe head is not parallel with the haft. It's angled forward from the haft. That's done intentionally because with the halberd head, if you are taking what I mentioned before with the amount of force behind the center of gravity, the rotation, when you are striking someone with plate armor, the first part of this weapon, if you aim it properly, that would hit them is right here, the little tip of the axe head. So all of that force of that swing is brought right down, right on this little tip, and that would go straight through their plate armor. And fortunately, if you have this sharpened well and tempered properly, it will go straight down into their armor, hopefully deep enough to actually hit their target beneath it. So that's why a lot of halberds run such long pulls, because it is your anti-armor weapon. It's not universal, especially when you get later into the age of muskets and the use of the halberds there, but at least in the Renaissance and Middle Ages, it was very useful for taking out armored people, as opposed to your spiky here, which is very good for just stabbing schmucks who don't have money for armor.
So I want the foot soldiers dead. Let me just stab you a few times.
Practicality. So I've seen a meme going on lately where they label the different parts of the halberd for how they're killed, and they incorrectly label it as armor, horses, people. And in reality, it's not that. It's armor, horses, people.
So we need to correct those people that are memeing wrong.
Yeah, I know. That's what my life is. But of course, you shouldn't generalize it in that way, too. As I even mentioned before, you can use the bec du corbin for multiple different uses, depending on what you want to do.
I feel like I need a halberd for at home if I need to turn the lights off or something.
Oh, yeah, that works. I would be lying if I told you I didn't do that before.
It'd be fun.
Cool.
So that kind of answered the last question I had on polearms, which was, in what ways did polearms reflect the military and social structures of their time? And you basically kind of said how it helped with the generals. Like, they were the ones that mainly had it.
Oh, it wasn't even just generals. We're talking about low-ranking non-commissioned officers, sergeants and captains. Sergeants in the Renaissance would definitely have it, but the weird thing is the halberd stuck around into the 1800s.
Okay.
I mean, you have American-made halberds used in the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812. not just as a sign of rank, but actually practically used.
Oh.
There's a type of kind of a weird fusion. This is a more practical or more common use of what's called a spontoon. It's kind of a spear with little handles going off on the side, little
Mm-hmm.
cross guards. And it was very commonly given to, there was also, I should say, a halberd version of it with an axe head on it as
Okay.
well. And that was often given to sergeants and captains and lower ranking officers. But as George Washington himself said, he wanted all of his officers familiar in the actual use of fighting with the spontoon so that they can lead their troops in a bayonet charge with this. That's America. We're talking about War of 1812
Yeah.
halberds. It's so fascinating that this thing that we associate with medieval and Renaissance is part of our history too.
I honestly did not realize that. Like I said, I figured most of our wars were fought with like guns and
They are. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the guns were
like,
always the majority.
No, but like finding out that half of our history, like we still use stuff like this that we associate with medieval, like that's pretty awesome.
We associate it with fantasy, like some unattainable thing, but in reality, it's ours. We can own it.
So cool. We all just need to start taking HEMA classes so we actually know how to use this stuff.
Yes, and it's so much fun because it's not just learning how to use it. Any guy who swings a sword in their dad's basement can go like, yeah, I know how to use a sword. But it's knowing how to use a sword as recorded by actual warriors from human history that connect us with that history of warfare that we are really passionate about. It's the historical connection. Swords aren't practical today. The only practicality is sports. In specific sports like fencing or kendo. Mm-hmm. But if we really want to know how to use swords, look to these manuals that are practiced in historical European martial arts. That's the fun of it. That's the connectivity to a time long past that is still something that we can claim as part of our own human history.
So awesome. Chills.
Yes.